Hi, everyone. I am so excited to join you today and do this video presentation with you. Today, we are focusing on assessments, creating assessments, understanding assessments, and really breaking it down. And note, when we talk about it, we're going to really focus on summative assessments. But once again, I'm going to say one more time, thank you for joining me. And we're going to go ahead and get started with our presentation. My name is Jessica Washington, and I am here to help guide you on this journey of all that is assessments today. And so we are creating assessments for the classroom. And just for time dateness, because sometimes policies and procedures do change, I am recording this in the fall of 2020. So if there is a change in policy, or because some of the things that are legal, I will update it. But at this point in time, this is the foundation and formula of how assessments are really designed, and not just in the classroom, but for your standardized testing and all of those things. So first of all, today, our presentation overview, we're going to actually focus on the purpose of assessments, embedding the standards into assessments, then understanding leveling of questions, talk about your answer choices and distractors, and then we'll close everything out with our summary. So if you want to right now, please get notes, pen, paper, all of those things. I do have some reflective questions that we're going to discuss, but pause the video so you can turn around and get all the things that you want to get in order to retain the information, because it is lengthy and it's chunky, but I'm going to help you get through it. Trust and believe. So first, we just need to talk about what the purpose of assessment is. And I know if you're here, you have been through some part of a test or exam. And we even talk about our teacher certification and the number of exams you have to go through. Well, assessment is an integral part of instruction, and it determines whether or not the goals of education are being met. Assessment also affects decisions about grades, placement, advancement, instructional needs, curriculum, and even in some cases, funding. Assessment also inspires us to ask the hard questions. Are we teaching what we think we are teaching? And that question is very important, because many times we as teachers are standing in front of a board and we are teaching our hearts out. We're going through all of the information. We have given it to our students. We have said it over and over again. And then we give a quiz and it was like they weren't even in the class. So when you talk about assessment, if we didn't have those checkpoints, how would we know what was learned? And that's actually one of the major pieces of why assessment is so valuable. We talk about testing and we talk about standardized testing, but would you really want to go into a surgery with a doctor who had never had to prove he knows how to operate on your body? And that is what assessments actually do. And so I'm going to go back to reading this a little bit, where we talk about, is there a way to teach the subject better, thereby promoting better learning? We have to ask those questions. And that's where you come in with your reteach, with your do now, with your scaffolding or spiraling information, because we have to make sure that at the end of the day, we are following the standards. Now I'm going to pause for a second. I've created a presentation on understanding the standards. So I want you, if you're not understanding what I mean, why the standards are so important, go back and watch that presentation, because utilizing those standards and then coming into assessment, it really aligns. It really makes everything fall into place and make better sense. Well, going back to the slide, today's students need to know not only the basic reading and writing and arithmetic skills, but they also need to know the skills that will follow them or allow them to face a world that is continually changing. Hello, COVID, right? So in that piece, it's not just about a child knowing how to do multiplication or addition. They actually have to know the processes of. And the reason why is we have to build critical thinking opportunities. Critical thinking is vital because one simple known fact that might not be known is that there are many times that a person might not be able to do a question on the assessment, but because they've learned how to critically think, they know what not to do. And they're able to eliminate some of the process until they can figure out a solution. And real testing and real rigor, and that's a whole nother presentation, comes from people who have enough knowledge base to be able to figure out or critically think through a situation in order to find an answer. So we go back to the slide where we talk about changes in the skills and base our knowledge. Our students need to require these new learning goals. These new learning goals change the relationship between assessment and instruction. So teachers really have to take an active role in making decisions about the purpose of assessment and the content that's being assessed. Therefore, when we start talking about assessment, we have to understand what are the different type of assessments. Now we have our pre-assessment or our diagnostic. We have formative assessments. We have a confirmative assessment, norm referenced assessment, criterion reference assessment, personal growth, and summative assessments. For the sake of this presentation, I am only going to focus on summative assessments. So if you're here to learn about diagnostic or norm reference, that's a whole different conversation. But for today and what we're talking about, we're focusing on summative assessment. However, before we focus on summative, I think we have to break down the differences between what a formative assessment is and what a summative assessment is. I'm actually going to be quiet for a second because I want you to view this slide and look at the words and come up with what's alike and what's different. So I'm coming back in. If you notice that our formative assessment is really meant as a monitoring tool, that's what we're utilizing on our day-to-day basis or in our unit that we're tracking and we're trying to improve information right then and there. Formatives are your exit tickets. Formative are your small, quick rubrics or checkpoints where you're looking to see, is the student learning that information? More specifically, formatives help students identify what they're good at and what they're not good at before they're actually tested on the information. So your formative work is actually very valuable, but it's also at a low stake, meaning this is where you can make mistakes. This is where you can get your guided practice. This is where you can get all of your help. Because when you have a formative assessment, that is where you understand this is what I know and this is what I do not know. That's the purpose of formative assessments. Now we have our summative assessments. The goal of summative assessments is actually to evaluate student learning. Formative, check on it. Summative, evaluate it. And it's usually end of an instructional unit or it's against standards or benchmarks, which is what I really focus on a lot. It's against the standards and the benchmarks. Therefore, summative assessments are high stake. They have an increased point value. They are worth more. They are a check or a determination of if a student is capable of that achievement. Summative assessments can be used formatively when students or faculty use it to guide their activities in additional courses. So we have AP courses, we have pre-calculus. You can turn around and use your summatives from your Algebra 2 courses to turn around to see if a student is now ready for pre-calculus. So that's just that little tip point. But the big walk away is summative is a high stakes exam, which caters or checks the standard of which the student is learning. Sorry, I had to pause for a second because I really want to make sure I'm utilizing our words correctly. So now that we focus on summative, because that's what this whole presentation is about, we have to ask first, what is an assessment? An assessment is a physical, unbiased, not opinion formulated, proof, written proof, evidence that a performance has been completed at a mastery level. So that the very basis of an assessment, let's think about that. Physical, proof, unbiased, mastery, a performance task. Let's put that all in the brain. Does that kind of make sense now? And that's one reason why it's important for our students to have to take these type of exams or state exams before they pass to the next level. And even if they do pass, there's a record of what has not been completed at mastery level. Well, I keep saying the word mastery over and over and over again. What exactly do I mean with mastery? See, when we talk about testing, when we talk about assessment, we always tend to see that we have people who are shooting for 100%. They want to ace the test. However, testing and assessments are not created in mind for acing. They are created for mastery. Our goal is to master the skill. Well, when you master a skill, you're actually at 70%. What does that mean? It means, if I'm going to take just the example of what we talk about in testing, if we're going to take 3 questions, 2 out of 3 is 66%, which is actually mastery because you round it up to 70%. What I'm saying is, if there's 3 questions all on the test about one subject, and I'm going to sit there and say place value, I can have 3 questions on a test. Well, those 3 questions, if a child gets all 3 correct, that proves mastery, correct? Because they obviously know how to do place value. They have 3 different type of questions that ask the same skill. However, if a child misses all of them, we have proof that they did not master it. Now, if a child gets 1 question right, but 2 wrong, did they master that skill? Well, out of 3 different questions, they were able to get 1 right, but they missed 2. No. Whatever they understood that one time, but they were not able to perform the task again. If a child turns around and gets 2 right and misses 1, did they master it? The answer is actually yes. You can go back and look at the 1 question that they've gotten wrong. It might be at a higher rigor level. It might be totally different, but it's pretty much understood that they did twice out of 3 times. So they have mastered the skill, but they probably need more practice. Doesn't mean that they're wrong. They've done the skill, but they're not at a perfected level. One reason why mastery is 70%, and I went with the 3 questions, is what happens when you turn around and have 4 questions at a standard. If a student does 2 right, but gets 2 wrong, do you have proof that the student mastered the skill? No, it's split. And so therefore, that's why it's looked at that 70%. Pretty much majority of the time that someone receives this skill, they're able to conquer it. We have the right to mess things up. We have the right to be wrong some of the time. So that's one reason why when we're testing, we don't always focus as a test writer or someone creating the assessment for 100%. We focus on mastery, because that gives us a better understanding of who needs what support. That's mastery. And once again, the focus is mastery, not perfection. And your number is 65, 70%. But you always have to make sure that for your standard, there is an obvious majority. And a student either is able to work on that majority or they work in that minority. And if they're working in that minority, you know that they need to go through and understand how to do that skill again. I know, a lot of information, right? So That is why we have to embed the standards now into the assessment. Because if we're just testing for whatever reason, we really don't know what we're mastering. But if you're testing based upon the standards, then you know exactly if the student is able to master at the baseline expectation or not. Embedding the standards sets the expectation, creates a mastery opportunity. It also ensures fair testing, and they're not all equal. When we set the expectation, we're setting the baseline expectation of what's supposed to be achieved. We also talk about fair testing. When you're using the standards, that means that you have taught what you're about to teach. You should never test someone on what you have not taught. You cannot work on the assumption of, well, they should get it, or it's easy. You have to make sure that you're teaching the standard that's in your pacing guide before you ever test on it. It's unfair. It is absolutely unfair. What if I turned around and said, right now, I am going to test on if you can run a marathon? You never trained for it. You don't know the ins and outs. You don't know what to do. It's literally the same exact thing. And so if you're holding someone at a graded expectation, remember that word, high stakes, on something they haven't been taught, it's just not fair. It also creates the mastery, which means that our presentation, our communication, all of those things that are done is creating the opportunity to create that 70% or more. And then we have to recognize that all standards are not equal. And we're going to break that down. There's two different types of standards, and they can be broken up into what's called a readiness or a supporting. Now, I am an educator that's gotten a lot of my training in Texas. And Texas actually has broken up their standards for their state and those educators into readiness and supporting. However, this formula can be followed all over. So I brought this out so you can kind of see the difference. You have readiness standards and you have supporting. So out of all the standards that are given, you get to turn around and figure out if they're readiness or they're supporting. Readiness usually is a lower number of standards per the unit. This is the unit of number and operations. So out of here, all of these are the standards. The readiness tends to be a lower number of standards, and I'm going to explain why in a second. But they usually require the skill set of a supporting standard to complete, and that is why. What happens is here, you have add and subtract whole numbers and decimals to the hundreds place using the standard algorithm. That's a readiness standard. There's more skills and there's more things to do. However, if you look over here to where it talks about determine the corresponding decimal to the tenths or hundred place in a specified point, that's a supporting standard. That's more detailed. It's very direct on what the expectation is. It's corresponding decimals to tenths or hundred. But this can actually be tested over here. So this supporting standard can actually go and become a readiness standard. And what happens is you cannot perform the task of a readiness standard without knowing the supporting standard. Now I'm going back to the definition. Readiness standards are usually more complex and embed a higher number of skills. Once again, that's what we just saw, and I'm going to break that down soon. And most times it's a higher verb level. Your supporting is usually a more number of standards, but it's usually simple or one or two skills, as well as it's a lower verb level. I'm going to the back to supporting. Interpret, compare and order. Representing, compare and order. Determine and represent. That's a lot of Bloom's taxonomy 1 and 2 levels, your understanding and your remembering. However, when you turn around and say represent the value, that goes into analyzation and application. When you're saying add and subtract whole numbers and decimals. So real quick, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. There's more skills. They're adding and they're subtracting. They're doing it with whole numbers and they're doing it with decimals. And they're doing it to the hundreds place and they're using the standard algorithm. That's a lot more skills. So that's just the breakdown of readiness and supporting. Let's go to the next slide. So this slide, we're going to look at it like this. Briefly, a quick tip. When you talk about the exams, many of the exams are going to have more readiness standards than supporting standards. So if I'm making an exam, I have more value in finding the readiness standards as if students can do it versus the supporting standards. Now, remember when we talked about mastery and we talked about 3 questions? If I had 3 questions for all of the supporting standards, like we just saw, let me go back. That's 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18 questions right there on the exam. That does a 1 skill thing. But if I move my supporting standard over here, do I really need to do 3 questions on 4.2H? No, because they can't do it unless they can't do the readiness unless they know the supporting. So it's very important for you to turn around and say, you know what? I don't even have to give a question to prove mastery on this, because if they can do 4.4A, I know they can do 4.2H. And you have to value and look at your standards in that way. So we go back to the tip, and that's one reason why your readiness standards are more high stakes. Your readiness standards are more valuable in the testing process than your supporting standards. Got it? Okay. Now, let's look at this real quick. And I'm going to be grateful for grade 4. This is a grade 4 math. So here is a standard. Which one is readiness? Which one is supporting? Hopefully you said that our 40A A1 is a supporting. Look at that verb. It's interpret. What is it asking to do? How many skills is in this standard? Let's read. Interpret a multiplication equation as a comparison. Interpret 35 equals 5 times 7 as a statement that 35 is 5 times as many as 7 and 7 times as many as 5. Still 1 skill. Represent verbal statements of multiple comparisons and as multiple equations. 2 skills. Now we go over to 4.0A3. Solve a multi-step word problem. Whoa, whoa. Not a 1-step, multi-step. I'm at least putting that one down for 2, okay? Posed with the whole numbers and having whole numbers answered using the 4 operations. Whoa. In this standard, the student must be able to add, subtract, multiply, or divide. And it's multi-step. So this is 4 skills right here, but that's just the first step. If we go to the second step, that means they must be able to add, or add, subtract, or add, multiply, or add, divide, because that's a multi-step. The first part of the problem they're going to add. The second part of the problem they might multiply. That changes that to 16 skills. Just right there. We haven't even finished the first sentence. Including problems in which remainders must be interpreted. Represent these problems using equations with a letter standing for the unknown quantity. Another skill, variables. Assess the reasonableness of answers using mental computation and estimation strategies, including rounding. That's at least 3. That's 20 skills in this one standard. So when we talk about that testing, would I create a test with just this standard, or is it better for me to turn around and use my 3 standards over here? Truthfully, if I were creating this test, this would go to about 5 questions because, once again, of so many skills that have to be utilized. You should have an estimation or a rounding answer or question. You should definitely have multi-step. You need to have a variable in there. There is a lot just impacted in this one standard alone. Breaking it down. So we're taking this moment to have a reflection. That was a lot of information. If you need to pause the video, pause the video. If you need to go back, go back. But this is a chance for you to take out your notebook and let's reflect. Our first reflection is, what characteristics would you use to describe a summative assessment versus a formative assessment? Now, I'm going to go ahead and read the second question, but I'm giving you more time on the back end to reflect. How are the standards embedded when designing an assessment? Remember, you can always pause this video, right? So hopefully you've paused, and please go back. Look at those things again. Did you have any new information? And right now, on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being absolute mastery, you're a master, you're a kung fu artist. You got this. You are a black belt in understanding what assessments are. You're a 5. If you're day 1 of Kung Fu Panda and you're saying, hey, this is uncharted territory, you're a 1. Quickly in your notebook, write down your number. 1, 3, 4, 2, whatever your number is. Go ahead and write that down, but we're going to go ahead and continue with the presentation. So we've talked about just the idea of the assessment and what should be done. Now we need to dig a little bit deeper into our summative assessments and understand question levels. Can you identify a question's level? Are you testing at the correct rigor? Can you actually use leveling and skill assortment for creating stronger assessments? So we're going to kind of focus on that next piece here. Now, I love this graphic. And before we even go into it, we're going to talk about how to level a question. Now, for the sake of this presentation, I actually pulled together Bloom's taxonomy and Webb's depth of knowledge, which is the DOK questioning level. Now, in my training and what we do in our school, I focus primarily on Bloom's taxonomy. We do not do a lot of DOK work, but I provided the graphic here in case you do. And this is the breakdown. This is old Bloom's taxonomy, 1956, which is going now to new, the new version. And you see the 6 levels of questionings that we've worked with. Well, this is DOKs. Once again, they're kind of with 4, but they really align. If you look at your red and your red, your yellow and your yellow, your green and your green, and your blue and your blue. No, that's the revised, your blue and your blue. Then you can see how they are very, very much aligned. And so the most popular way of breaking down a questions level is really asking the question of what kids have to do and how they must do it. Do they arrange the information? Do they assess the information? Do they remember the information? How are they getting the information done? How are they doing the skill? How are they applying the skill? So that's where your levels are. I roughly work with 3 levels. I work with comprehension and knowledge at the first level, analyzation and applying at the second level, creating and evaluating at the level 3. Okay? Breathe through. We're coming through it. Here are question stems that are based on those levels. So if you were creating an exam or if you were questioning in the classroom, you easily can just look at the question skills and determine what level you're asking the question on. If you have exams now or an assessment, go look at your question stem. If it starts off with who did this, you know you're at a remembering level. However, if you went to predict what would happen if this person did that, you're at an application level. So the very first thing you can do is look at your questions and determine, based upon the stem, where do they fall? So looking at that, we're going to level some exam questions. I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to let you read. So right here for our first question. The question is, what is the value of the digit 1 in this number? What are we asking kids to do? Level 1, a recall. They just have to place. There's not a computation that's happening here. I just have to find what the value of 1 is and then look at my answer choices. But in this one, Zeke used 3/4 cup of white sugar, 3/4 cup of brown sugar, and 2 1/4 cup of flour to bake cookies. What was the difference between the amount of flour and the combined amount of sugar that Zeke used? That is a comparison, which means that we're going right into your analyzation rigor level, okay? So this is a level 1, this is a level 2. Now, let's do it again because I've been playing around with the math, I understand, no problem. Let's look at some ELA examples, okay? In the paragraph 1, the author uses the phrases, wipe the sweat from his brow, and felt like he'd been digging for hours to suggest that Max, what? Suggestion. And then if you notice here in the question, it's talking about author's purpose. This is a level 2 because the student has to infer or suggest and use details from the story, okay? But this one is, what point of view does the author use in his story? Recall. You just have to know what point of view is, right? First person, third person. Recall, so that's a level 1. Are we getting it? We starting to understand just a little bit? Now, there's another way that we can level questions. We can level questions by the task at hand. Now, this is literally the same exact question. Watch. What measure in degrees of angle YXZ? What is the measure of the angle RST to the nearest degree? These are both level 1 questions. What is? But look at the actual task. In this one, there's a right angle and it tells you the measure is 90 degrees. It tells you the opposite measure is 53. What does a student have to do? And let me go ahead and give you this fact real quick. Both of these are grade 4 level questions. Grade 4. I'm sorry, both of these questions are on a 4th grade standard. I received them from a 4th grade exam. So these are not difference of grade levels. This is the exact same standard and the exact expectation, but the way that they're asked are 2 different ways. If you're thinking about it, you really just have to take the 90 minus the 53 and you can find your solution. It's a single step. But over here, we didn't work with the basic 90. Look at where the angle is. So a student's going to have to first, 1, know how to read a protractor. They're going to have to be able to know, and this is very hard for 4th grade, are they supposed to be using the 50 or the 130? Is it obtuse or is it acute? And then they're doing the calculation from that point. That's a multi-step solution. Same question, which is a level 1, now has been changed to a level 2 based upon the task that this question is asking here. Let's see if we can do it again. Right. ELA, here we come. Here is your question. What does the word misfortunes mean in paragraph 11? It's actually a simple vocabulary recall task. If you just covered up paragraph 11, it says, what does the word misfortunes mean? But let's go to paragraph 11. When we go to paragraph 11, our sentence is, Christopher explained to his friends that the week's misfortunes were not his fault. It's not even giving you real context clues. In fact, the task of inferencing, utilizing text has caused it now to go to a higher level because the definition is not given. So now students have to read the entire paragraph to be able to figure out what the answer choice is. That's an increase of task. That makes this a level 2. Good job. And the answer is unlucky events. I read the story. So now we kind of understand our levels. We have 3 levels, which is level 1, remember and understand. And that is your lowest level, and it's the basic expectations to remember, to recall. It's actually one that majority of our teaching time is actually spent on, because it is giving the foundation that's needed to understand. However, level 2 is apply and analyze. And level 2 is majority of state or international exams. If you're taking map testing, well, the grade level expectation should be at that apply or analyze. But if you're taking American standardized test, you are definitely working at a majority level 2 exam. If you're taking, when we took our teacher certification exams, apply and analyzation, those are the test levels that things are made at. Your level 3 is create and evaluate. Those are usually task and or project-based understanding and graded by rubric or a task chart. Now, I don't know about you. I'm kind of old. When I first took my first teacher certification test in Oklahoma, there was about 60 questions on pedagogy, which were multiple choice, which we took the 60 questions, did it, applied, analyzed, erased, rethought, thought again, had to remember, we did that. However, I also had to write 2 essays, two like 6-page essays. Now, if the essay was something simple like describe your teaching philosophy, that's one thing, because that still is, well, that is actually maybe applied. But most of those essays are, this is the scenario here. This child needs this. These is the data. What are you going to do and how do you do it? That moved that to a create and evaluate, which is a level 3. So just because a student is writing or anything, you have to make sure that it's something that is task-based and can be graded by a rubric or a chart, because it can be tested. Now, once again, you have to look at your testing environment or your testing norms to know which one is focused. But level 3 is never majority of the exam. It can be, in some cases, a high percentage of the exam, but that breaks down to each state or each test or each international, what their expectations are. You just here to understand the difference. So you have your level 1, your level 2, and your level 3. So now it's time for me to question you. Are you ready for this quiz? And guess what? I leveled the questions for you. So get out your pen and paper. And your first question, which is a level 1, identify the different levels of questions. Also pay attention. That's not a hard task. You either knew the answer and you're able to write it down, or you knew exactly where to find the answer. But you didn't have to think about anything. You didn't have to create. You didn't have to analyze. You didn't have to apply. You really just had to remember and write. Well, now we move to this level 2 question. Based upon your new learning, what ideas apply when you now create assessments? You should be thinking, because what's happening now is you're going back to your new learning. And what ideas apply now when you create assessments? Now you're thinking about the future and you're creating. So you're analyzing your answers, right? And then now we're going to move to this level 3 question. And I'm going to tell you it's time for you to create an outline of a 10-question exam that uses 3 readiness standards and 1 supporting standard. See what happened here? Now you're creating, which means that you have to take all the information that you just learned and create something. Now, for the time that's taken here, you do not have to create something unless you want to challenge yourself and push pause, and you can do that. But I'm going to give you just a second to look at these questions. And then I'm going to ask you now, if you did create an outline, what would it look like? What do you know now? What would you still be concerned about? Are you ready to create an outline or a blueprint? Well, I'm not going to give you that task and not give you a little assessment. Listen. So then I'm going to plug in up here. I have not leveled my questions yet. I'm going to show you when I do that. But I'm just going to sit here and say, I'm going to start off and just go AS1, AS2, AS3. Now I have these taken care of. I'm going to go BS1, BS3. I'm just going random on BS. So this is a brief video clip, just 60 seconds, of the process it takes to outline an exam. This is actually available at the YouTube for A Million Minds, and it's called Design a Test Like a Pro. Now I've broken down my standards in a fair test where they're all mixed up. Now I'm going to level out my questions. I have a level 1, level 2. So if you want to have additional help or support, that video is there for you. Please find it. But I want us to keep our focus on right now, understanding assessments. So we're going to move forward to our next portion of this. And that is distractors. Actually, I feel like I lost a page, so excuse me for a second. There it is. Understanding a distractor. What is a distraction? Who's seen the movie where the dogs are running? I think it's Up. And they're talking, they're having a conversation, and all of a sudden they say, squirrel. Or talking, and ball. There's something there that changes their focus from the task at hand. And that is our test answers. So your distractor is your answer choices. And the answer choices are just as valuable as the question. Answer choices is what can determine your question quality. You can write a phenomenal question, but if your answer choices are very basic, you're not showing that the student knows the work. A multiple choice item should consist of a problem known as the STEM, a list of suggested solutions known as alternatives, and the alternative consistent of one correct or one best choice, and the others are incorrect. But those are also known as distractors, which means they could make sense. Why are distractors important? The effectiveness of a multiple choice question is heavily dependent upon the distractors. Now, the thing is that a good distractor can often prove if the student understands something or not, or are they just doing the process of elimination and guessing? Now we can go to this slide. What makes a distractor? I'm going to be quiet while you read this, and we'll talk a little bit in more detail. So the very first one, and that's why it's at top, is all the answer choices must be plausible. For example, if I'm just doing a quick brief question just off the top of my head, and I say, what is 6 times 6? Okay, my answer choices would definitely be 12. Where did I get that from? In case a student didn't multiply, they added, they would still find that answer there. My answer choice would definitely be 36 because that's the answer. My answer choice also might be 26 or 24 because that's a good one that they mix up. But if I put in answer choices that are like 2, if I put in answer choices that are 3 being odd, I know that a 6 of 6 is an even, and they're always going to be even. It's really not the best distractor unless there's a way that a child can get to that answer by doing something else. So you really have to make sure that your alternatives are just not answers that are just written down, but they're actually something that's plausible, that makes sense, that a person would turn around and pick that. Because you have to turn around and test if they know the skill, not if they're guessing, not if they got lucky, not if it's elimination, that they actually know the skill. The alternatives must be stated clearly and concisely. They must be mutually exclusive. They should be homogeneous in content. And I'll show you that. You can't just write different sentences all the time, or they have to kind of be aligned with the same wording so it doesn't show favoritism. The alternatives of all of the above and none of the above really should not be used. That's pretty much like an 80% of the time. Every once in a while, you can. But the reason why is because it changes it from being a process thought to an exact elimination. Meaning if if one thing makes sense, but the rest of them doesn't, that means all of the above can't be used. And then it takes it from being a processing piece to elimination. They should be in logical order or alphabetical order because you have to make sure that you're not showing bias towards positions. Now, I'm going to give you just a few examples of good distractors. And the very first one is looking at this science. And it says a thin beam of light is shown in this picture. This is homogeneous. Look at how each of the statements align to each other. They all start with light, and its reflection travels in straight lines. Light cannot reflect from more than one surface. Light that goes through water cannot travel in straight lines. Light can travel in a circular path. So they're all stated correctly. You see no underline here. No, all of the answer choices are just presented unbiasedly for a student to make a determination. This was actually a very good distractor because the answer here is A. However, on this exam, I have the data, a lot of people chose C. Why? Because it made and showed a difference that a lot of our students didn't understand that a straight line still can reflect and bend. So that's a processing understanding about reflection. Reflection does travel in straight lines, but it doesn't have to be just, I would almost say a plane. It doesn't have to be this. It can be boom, boom, which is still a straight line. So that was a beautiful example of a distractor or different things because students really had to pick between the two and it went back to their understanding. Here's a math one. Very easy question. Could be a level 1, but it's actually a level 2 because of the distractor and how they did the answer choices. Which line does M appear to be perpendicular to line K? So what they've done is added additional lines, and you see R. So immediately off the top, you see F has a perpendicular line, but is it perpendicular to K? No, it's parallel to K. So what happens here is you actually have an answer that is correct, but wrong line placements. Over here's the data analysis. 22% of the state chose this. So this is a grade 4 question. So 22% of the kids actually chose this one, which means that they didn't process the information. They simply saw what was perpendicular, but they did not turn around and pay attention to the details. Not many picked H at all, probably because there's no perpendicular at all in there, which is fair. But then you also had a couple of people pick G. Why is that? Because G is a good answer if J wasn't available. But you can definitely see, even though there's a cross, it's not perpendicular as much as J. So that shows you the difference, and J is your correct answer. These were great distractors because students had to think and process. And they probably went back and forth between these two or these two in order just picking their choice. So what is the value of a good distractor? Well, it takes away the option of elimination because a lot of people, me included, actually used a lot of elimination tactics in order to find the correct answer. In fact, you do. I know it's not this. I know it's not this. So I decide between two. And that's still a very smart testing practice, and it should be done. However, we can't give answer choices that are obvious to be able to be eliminated, because if we give 3 answer choices that should be eliminated, we're not testing the processing piece. So we don't want so much deletion or elimination that students are not showing they know how to do the standard. Reading and answer choices as well. Another quick tip is that single word answer choices should not be a norm on the test. Put it in sentences. A lot of our students, and this is unfair for our English as a second language students, get tripped up on exams because they just see more words. It might be the same exact sentence, but if they're not used to that vocabulary, if they're not used to that endurance in reading, they easily tire out and go into guessing processes. So we have to make sure that that wordiness is being able to be utilized in a smart and concise way, which goes back to the question that we just saw about light bending. It could say light is straight, light can be reflective, but if not, they gave full sentences, and that makes a difference in testing. It also is preparation. When dealing with international tests, the distractor method is used very heavily. So it's important for our students to be able to see that now in the comfort of their own school and teachers, so we can guide them on how to be able to become successful or show mastery in questioning. And now that we look at distractors, the type of questioning is used to assess student understanding is important as well. So that is the purpose of good distractor. You should have distractions in your testing. So real quick, going over once again the formula for, I would say, distractors or just even writing test questions is the following. Multiple choice item, it contains of STEM, options, auxiliary information. Now, real quick, you don't have to have a multiple choice item, but you do need to have a question that requires processing and level 4 skills. So when you talk about fill in the blanks, is it really doing something that's analyzing and having students apply, or are they simply recalling information? Your STEM contains context, content, and or the question the student is required to answer. Options include a set of alternative answers with one correct option and one or more incorrect options, which are called distractors. Thank you. To answer a multiple choice item, the student is presented with the STEM and those options that differ in their relative correctness. And students are required to make a distinction among the response opportunities, several which could be correct, but they must select the best, which is the correct option. The other options cannot be correct, only one correct answer. But you have some that are really, really good. There was just a better answer. So let's do this quick, reflective, quick write. This is your opportunity. It's been a lot of information. Just take out your own notes and just jot down your own personal reflections when it comes to us talking about assessments and the use of distractors. Like I said, I'll be quiet. I know it's a lot, but I know you can remember it. What else did you think about? I know. I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide. Before we close out this presentation, I want us to challenge ourselves and think of 2 challenge points where you can think about. Our first challenge is, in what ways can we create opportunities for our students to become successful on summative question levels and tasks and even distractors before the actual exam? That's a challenge. That's planning. How do we create those opportunities for our students to be able to see this information and it's not high stakes? Because I'll be honest with you, if you turn around and change your next assessment just right now, but you haven't taught your students at that level, that's not fair. It has to be that process. You should be doing do nows, one question of the day, pick the best distractor. I even had a great time in the classroom where I let kids pick the worst answer. Yeah, we had a multiple choice question test and they had to pick the absolute worst answer. And the arguing they did on trying to determine what answer was the absolute worst you could pick was amazing. It's a different way to think about the same things, right? Our second challenge point is, with teaching the methods of how assessments are created to students, would that help students in understanding or will that cause them additional test anxiety? I don't know. I'm asking, that's why this is a challenge. If a student sat through, especially like a senior who's preparing for, well, actually that would be a junior, ACT or SAT. If they sat through this, would this be beneficial to them? Would they now have the tools to be able to understand where questions come from and how so they can approach them? It's a challenge point. You have the answer. But until then, we'll see, right? Just a summary of our presentation. We talked about our summative assessments. We talked about question and task levels. We also talked about understanding distractors. And it has been a very long presentation, and I appreciate the fact that you're going through it and you're guiding and you're walking. And remember that marathon analogy I gave you very early in this presentation? See, we're now walking the miles. So it might not be that hard to imagine doing a marathon, but we are doing more than we started before. And that's what this process is. We're walking, we're figuring it out so we can get to our position where we are providing that successful environment to teach our students how to do this. And we are creating assessments that are valid and valuable. Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity to teach and guide and give information. If you have questions, please post them underneath. I just once again want to say I enjoyed this. I don't know if you can tell. I like talking about curriculum. I like talking about things that are happening in the classroom. And I really enjoy being able to provide teachers with tools for success, period. Because every time I help you, you help our students, we build the world. We are the world. Yes, we are. Mm-hmm. And we are the children. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate it. If you need anything, please do not hesitate to subscribe or even just post in the comments below. I will do my best to help you out. Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity for us to talk and enjoy each other and our spaces together. Once again, my name is Jessica Washington. I'm here helping you build another million minds in our community. Thank you so much. Until next time.